The lawyer's smirk was a weapon, and he pointed it right at me. Across the polished hearing room table, its surface reflecting the cold, sterile lights overhead, he leaned back, oozing a smug charm that made my skin crawl. "Is the decorated officer getting nervous?" he taunted, his voice a silken blade designed to get under my skin. I held his gaze, willing my face into a blank mask of professional indifference, but inside, a cold, hard knot was twisting in my gut. He was a shark, and he smelled blood. His smile, though, vanished in a heartbeat. It didn't fade, it was wiped clean. A flicker of genuine, unscripted shock replaced it as the man seated next to him, the lead investigator, slammed his folder shut. The crack echoed like a gunshot in the tense, suffocating silence of the room. The investigator, a man named Thompson who I knew had ice in his veins, looked pale, his usual composure shattered. He leaned in, his eyes darting frantically from the lawyer to the warden, and whispered the 5 words that blew my entire world apart: "This is classified." The silence that followed was heavier than anything I've known in 20 years behind the walls of a federal penitentiary. It wasn't just quiet, it was a physical weight pressing down, thick with secrets, unspoken threats, and the terrifying, sudden vertigo of standing on the edge of a cliff I never even knew was there. But to really get the sheer, crushing weight of that moment, to understand why a simple disciplinary hearing for one inmate could grind a federal investigation to a screeching halt and make men in bespoke suits sweat, we have to go back. Because this story doesn't start in that sterile hearing room with its smell of floor wax and fear. It starts 3 weeks earlier, with a routine inmate transfer that turned out to be anything but. My name is Jack Miller. For half of my 43 years, I've been a corrections officer at a notorious federal supermax, a place that swallows men whole. It's a city of concrete and steel, a vertical tomb where the only currency is fear and respect, and my job is simple: walk the line, keep order, and go home in one piece. I thought I'd seen it all, every flavor of human depravity and desperation. I was proud of my ability to read people, to spot the predators, the victims, and the schemers from 100 yards away. But the day they brought in Silas Kane, all my finely tuned instincts went haywire. The transfer bus rolled in on a gray, drizzly Tuesday, the sky the color of dirty dishwater. Processing new inmates is a grim, dehumanizing dance I've led 1,000 times. Strip search, delousing, uniform, cell number. It's a conveyor belt designed to break a man down, to peel away his identity layer by layer until all that's left is a number. Most guys show up either terrified, their eyes wide with the raw panic of the newly caged, or posturing with a pathetic, fake bravado that crumbles within hours. Silas Kane was neither. He stepped off the bus in shackles, his movements economical and precise. His eyes weren't wide or defiant. They were scanning the yard, the guard towers, the fences, not with fear, but with a calm, unnerving intelligence. He was assessing, analyzing. He wasn't a big guy, not physically imposing. Late 40s, maybe, with the lean, wiry build of a long-distance runner and the quiet, observant look of a university librarian. No prison tattoos snaking up his neck, no jagged scars telling the brutal story of his life. There was a stillness to him, a core of absolute discipline that screamed control. When I barked his name from the processing checklist, he met my gaze directly. There was no defiance, no submission. Just a simple, unnerving acknowledgement. "Kane. Silas. Welcome to your new home," I said, my voice deliberately flat and devoid of emotion. "Officer," he replied. His voice was the most shocking thing of all. It was even, cultured, with a crisp diction that spoke of education and privilege. It was the voice of a man who'd seen more boardrooms than back alleys, and it was completely, jarringly out of place. Over the next few days, Kane was a ghost. He existed within the system so perfectly it was like he was invisible. He followed every rule to the letter, kept his cell immaculate, a stark contrast to the chaos around him, and spoke only when spoken to. In the constant deafening noise of the cell block, the shouting, the clanging steel, the blaring televisions, his silence was louder than a riot horn. The other inmates, creatures of instinct and violence, seemed to feel it, too. They gave him a wide berth, a bubble of space that wasn't earned through threats or violence, but out of a kind of confused, primal respect. He wasn't one of them. He was something else entirely. I found myself watching him on the monitors more than I should have, trying to solve the puzzle of him. There was this specific mannerism he had, steepling his fingers, pressing the tips together when he was deep in thought, That tickled a memory from a life I'd lived long before I ever put on this uniform. A life I had tried to forget. The first real red flag went up about a week in. The warden, a by-the-book bureaucrat named Patterson who valued order above all else, called me into his office. He hated surprises, and he looked like he'd just been handed a live grenade with the pin pulled. "Jack," he said, skipping the usual pleasantries. "You've had eyes on the new transfer, Kane?" "Yes, sir." "He's quiet. A model inmate. No trouble." "Well, he's found some," Patterson sighed, pushing a thin file across his polished desk. "Got into it with another inmate in the library. A shouting match. The other guy, a known agitator, claims Kane threatened him." I raised an eyebrow. The story felt wrong, like a badly written script. It didn't fit the man I'd been observing. "Kane? He barely says a word to anyone." "Exactly," the warden said, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on the desk. "The infraction is nothing. A few days in the hole, a slap on the wrist. But look at this." He pointed to a new sheet of paper, a crisp legal notice that had just arrived. "He's requested a formal disciplinary hearing, and he's bringing in outside counsel. A high-powered attorney from D.C., a guy named Alastair Finch." That name didn't mean anything to me then, but the move itself was a cannon blast in the quiet prison world. Inmates don't get high-priced, shark-infested water lawyers for petty squabbles over a library book. "Finch is flying in from D.C., the warden went on, his voice tight with anxiety. "And that's not all. The Bureau is sending an observer. An investigator named Thompson is coming down from the regional office." Now I was floored. The FBI doesn't dispatch an agent to watch a prison hearing about a library argument. The pieces weren't just not fitting, they were from entirely different puzzles. The library incident was a pretext, a trigger for something much, much bigger. "Sir," I said carefully, choosing my words, "what's in Kane's file? What was he convicted of?" Patterson leaned back, his chair groaning in protest. "That's the other thing. It's thin. Annoyingly so. The charges are conspiracy, wire fraud, white-collar stuff. But huge chunks of it are sealed. Redacted by the Department of Justice, citing national security." National security. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and cold. The quiet librarian in cell block D was a lot more than a white-collar crook. That familiar knot in my stomach was back, tighter than ever. It's the same feeling you get right before a riot. The air goes still, the ambient noise drops to a hum, and you know all hell is about to break loose. "I want you in that hearing, Jack," the warden said, his eyes locking onto mine. "You're my best officer. I need your eyes and ears in that room. Something stinks to high heaven, and I want to know what it is." Over the next few days, the whole prison felt like it was holding its breath. The guards were jumpy, the inmates restless. I did some quiet digging on the Federal Inmate Network, calling in a favor or two. Kane's transfer history was bizarre. He'd been moved 3 times in 2 years, each time to a progressively lower security facility. That's unheard of for any prisoner, let alone one flagged for national security. It was like someone was deliberately moving him down the ladder, putting him somewhere he'd be more vulnerable. Or maybe, somewhere he could make a very specific move. The day before the hearing, I saw him. Alastair Finch, the lawyer. He was meeting with Kane in one of the non-contact visitation booths. Finch was exactly what you'd picture from a DC power player. Expensive suit that probably cost more than my car, perfect hair, and a smile that never touched his eyes. I watched them on the security monitor in my office. They weren't talking like a lawyer and a client preparing for a minor hearing. They looked like partners strategizing. At one point, Finch laughed, a sharp, barking sound, and clapped Kane on the shoulder through the partition. It was familiar, easy. And on Kane's face, for the very first time since he'd arrived, I saw a flicker of something other than calm neutrality, grim, resolute determination. That's when the memory started to take shape, a ghost at the edge of my vision. The arrogant tilt of Finch's head, the predatory confidence. I had seen it before. A long, long time ago. In another life. Before the uniform, before the concrete walls, before my world had shrunk to this. I couldn't place it, not yet, but the feeling was undeniable. The next morning, I walked into that hearing room with the lawyer's strange familiarity nagging at the back of my mind and the inmate's profound mystery swirling in my head. I thought I was there to be the warden's eyes and ears, to watch a show. I had no idea I was walking onto a battlefield, and the first shot was about to be aimed right at me. The hearing room was small, cold, and smelled of industrial floor wax and stale air. The players were arranged around the heavy table, Warden Patterson, looking deeply uncomfortable and out of his depth, a weary retired judge brought in as an impartial adjudicator, and then the main event, Alastair Finch, radiating smugness like a heat wave, and beside him, Silas Kane, as still and silent as a statue carved from stone. Across from them sat Investigator Thompson, the Fed, whose watchful eyes missed nothing. And then me, the guard, the grunt. The adjudicator droned on, reading the official report of the library incident. It sounded even more ridiculous and flimsy when read aloud in this tense, high-stakes environment. Finch cut him off with an impatient wave of his hand. "Your Honor, with all due respect, we're not here to debate a shouting match over a book. My client is a model prisoner, a fact that the facility's own records will corroborate." His eyes, cold and calculating, slid to me. "In fact, let's ask the man on the ground. Officer Jack, tell me, in your extensive experience, have you seen an inmate with a cleaner, more compliant record than Mr. Kane?" It was a trap, plain and simple. A yes sinks the prison's case for the infraction. A no is a lie that could be easily disproven. "Inmate Kane follows procedure," I said, my voice flat, giving him nothing. Finch's grin widened. It was a predator's smile, all teeth. "He follows procedure." What a ringing endorsement. "But you seem tense, officer. All this high-level attention from Washington must be overwhelming for a man in your position." He leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that carried across the table. "Tell me, is the decorated officer getting nervous?" And that's when it happened. That's when Thompson slammed his folder shut. The sound was an explosion in the dead quiet. "This line of questioning is over," Thompson snapped, his voice tight with a sudden, raw urgency I had never heard from a federal agent. He looked past Finch, past Kane, directly at the bewildered adjudicator. "This matter," he said, his voice dropping to that fateful, chilling whisper that would haunt my nights, "is now under federal jurisdiction. This is classified." The word hung in the room like a death sentence. The adjudicator's jaw went slack. Finch, for just a split second, looked genuinely surprised, as if this sudden escalation wasn't part of his meticulously crafted plan. But the smirk quickly returned to his face. He'd gotten what he wanted. He'd poked the bear and forced the government's hand. The hearing was over. I was left standing in the hall a moment later, the word "classified" ringing in my ears, and the lawyer's mocking, arrogant face burned into my mind. That night, sleep was impossible. My mind was a chaotic storm, replaying Kane's impassive face, Finch's sneer, Thompson's sudden, visceral panic. What the hell was going on? The nagging familiarity of it all, of Finch's face, drove me to the one place I hadn't been in a decade, the dusty, cobweb-filled attic. In a forgotten corner was a heavy footlocker. My brother's footlocker. Leo. The family genius, a cryptography prodigy recruited by a shadowy defense contractor right out of MIT. He was brilliant, but troubled, haunted by the patterns he saw that everyone else missed. 10 years ago, he died. A single-car accident on a wet road. That was the official story. I always wondered. With a creak of protest, I opened the trunk. The smell of dust and old paper filled the air. Inside an old photo album from his time at the company, Ethelred Technologies, I started flipping through the brittle pages. And then my stomach dropped through the floor. There was Leo, younger, grinning, his arm slung casually over a colleague's shoulder. It was a younger Silas Kane. The same quiet, intelligent eyes. They weren't just colleagues. The camaraderie in the photo was undeniable. They were friends. My hands started shaking. I kept flipping, page after page of a life my brother lived that I knew nothing about. Another photo, a formal company dinner. In the background, schmoozing with one of the firm's partners, was a young, ambitious lawyer. The suit was dated, the haircut was different, but the arrogant posture, the predatory smile, it was unmistakably Alastair Finch. He worked for the law firm that repped Ethelred. He was their fixer. It all came crashing down on me, a tidal wave of realization. This wasn't random. Kane, Finch, the farcical hearing, it was all connected to my brother. To Leo. The next day at the prison, I was a live wire, every nerve ending tingling with a dangerous new awareness. The concrete and steel walls felt more suffocating than ever. As I was walking the yard during count, a voice came from behind me, low and urgent. "Officer." It was Thompson. He looked grim, sleep-deprived. He led me to a blind spot between two buildings, out of sight of the cameras. "I'm going to say this once," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Walk away. Forget you were in that room. Forget the name Silas Kane. Go back to your job, punch your clock, and keep your head down." "What's going on?" I demanded, my own voice low and hard. That man, Kane, he knew my brother, Leo Miller. Thompson's face hardened into a mask of stone. "All the more reason to stay out of it. Your brother's story is a closed book, officer. You start trying to turn pages, the only thing you'll find is your own grave." He turned and walked away, leaving me in the shadows. He thought he could scare me off. Big mistake. All he did was confirm everything. My brother's death wasn't an accident. And these men, Kane and Finch, were standing at the heart of whatever terrible secret got him killed. Thompson's fear lit a fire in me. I wasn't just a corrections officer anymore. I was my brother's avenger. My investigation became an obsession. By day, I was Officer Miller, walking the tiers, doing my counts. By night, I was a ghost in the digital archives of my brother's life, bending and breaking every rule that could get me fired and thrown in a cell myself. I ran facial recognition software on Kane's visitor logs, cross-referencing them with old employee lists from Ethelred Technologies that I had to slice through 3 layers of firewalls to access. And then I got the hit that blew it all wide open. One of Kane's recent visitors, listed as a paralegal for Finch's firm, was a man named Marcus Thorne. I stared at the grainy, pixelated ID photo, a cold certainty washing over me. I knew that face. I raced back to the attic, to Leo's album. And there he was, Marcus Thorne, a senior programmer on my brother's team. The final, devastating piece clicked into place with the force of a physical blow. A half-forgotten conversation I'd had with Leo weeks before he died. He was paranoid, agitated, talking about his work, something he called Project Janus. A master encryption key, a program so powerful it could lock, or unlock, any digital system on Earth. "A key that can open any door is a weapon, Jack," he'd whispered frantically over the phone. "And the wrong people want it. The very wrong people." He told me he'd built a failsafe, a way to stop it, and was going to expose them. A week later, his car was a wreck on a lonely stretch of highway. Kane and Thorne were on that project. My brother was its chief architect. And Finch was the corporate cleaner hired to sanitize the mess when Leo grew a conscience. Kane's conviction was a sham, a convenient way to bury him and his knowledge in the deepest, darkest hole they could find. But they underestimated him. They underestimated his loyalty to my brother. The library incident, the hearing, it was all a brilliant, desperate, high-stakes play by Kane to get a message out, to create a disturbance big enough that someone, somewhere, would have to look. He was trying to finish what my brother started. And by some cosmic twist of fate, I was the only one who could help him. Okay, pause for a second. Before I tell you what I found hidden in a secret compartment in my brother's old desk, the digital weapon that let me tear their whole world down, if your heart is pounding right now, do me a favor and hit that like button. Trust me, the story's about to go completely off the rails. I found the thumb drive in a false bottom in his old mahogany desk drawer, a space so cleverly hidden I'd missed it a dozen times. It was protected by an encryption that might as well have been written in an alien language. Days of guessing passwords, birthdays, pet names, anniversaries, got me nowhere. I was about to give up, staring at the screen in bleary-eyed defeat, when I remembered Leo's obsession with mythology, with duality. Project Janus, the two-faced god of doors and gates, beginnings and endings. On a desperate whim, a shot in the dark, I typed a two-word Latin phrase I'd seen in one of his old textbooks, Ordo ob Chao, order out of chaos. The screen flickered. A single file appeared, stark and menacing. It was a log. A detailed, encrypted log of communications between the senior partners at Ethelred, Marcus Thorne, and a powerful, shadowy figure they only ever referred to as the Architect. And it detailed the entire conspiracy, the theft of the project, and the meticulously planned cover-up of my brother's murder, orchestrated step by Alistair Finch. I finally had my weapon. My revenge couldn't be a punch or a shout. It had to be a surgical demolition. Finch and his masters operated in the shadows of power and plausible deniability. A direct attack was useless. They'd bury me, and the evidence, forever. I needed a lever. I needed to use their own system against them. And that lever was Investigator Thompson. I cornered him in the employee parking lot after my shift, the setting sun casting long, dark shadows. "Thompson," I called out. He turned, his body instantly on guard, his hand twitching almost imperceptibly toward his jacket. "I told you to walk away, Miller." "I can't," I said, stepping into his personal space. "Because I know about Project Janus. And I know about the Architect." The flash of pure, undiluted panic in his eyes was all the confirmation I needed. Thompson wasn't one of them. He was trapped by them, a pawn in their game just like Cain, just like me. "What do you want?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "A meeting," I said. "Off the record. Finch, his client, and whoever he answers to. The Architect. You, me, and you're going to bring in Silas Kane. You tell them I have proof Leo Miller's death was a homicide. You tell them I have the Janus logs. Their arrogance is their weakness. They won't let them believe a prison guard could actually touch them. They'll have to come." He stared at me, a silent, furious war raging behind his eyes. Fear against duty, survival against conscience. Finally, he gave a single, slow, reluctant nod. "God help us all," he muttered, and it sounded like a prayer. The meeting was an ambush, staged 2 days later in a secure, soundproofed conference room deep in the Federal Building. Alistair Finch was there, looking more annoyed than worried. Next to him, a silver-haired man in his late 60s sat with an aura of immense, unshakable power. He wore a simple, dark suit, but it fit him like a second skin. This was the Architect. Thompson stood by the door, his face pale, looking like a man at his own execution. I stood across from them, a lone CO facing down a dragon. On my signal, 2 marshals brought in Silas Kane. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw a flicker of hope. He gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "Game on." "Let's make this quick," Finch started, his voice dripping with disdain. "We're busy men. You have some wild, grief-fueled fantasy to share with us, officer." I didn't answer him. I just slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a printout from Leo's log. A payment transfer from an untraceable shell corp to a private account owned by Alistair Finch, dated 2 days after my brother's accident. The memo line contained 2 words, Janus Sanitation. Finch went pale. The color drained from his face as if a plug had been pulled. The silver-haired man, however, didn't flinch. He radiated a cold, dangerous calm. "A fabrication," the man rumbled, his voice a low growl of authority. "You have nothing, Mr. Miller." He used my name, a deliberate threat, a reminder that he knew who I was, that he could reach me. "What are you going to do, officer?" "Write me a ticket." It was the same mocking tone, the same soul-deep arrogance. And it was my cue. I looked right past him, at Silas Kane. Leo always said a key that can open any door needs a key that can lock them all, I said, my voice steady. Kane smiled, a real smile this time, lighting up his tired features. He called it the final argument, he said, his voice clear and strong, resonating in the silent room. A backdoor into Janus. A kill switch. He was afraid his creation would be misused, so he built a self-destruct mechanism. And before they silenced him, he made sure I knew how to use it. Finch and the boss exchanged a panicked look, their composure finally cracking. "You're bluffing," Finch spat, but the sweat beading on his forehead told a different story. "Am I?" I asked softly. "The library incident? It wasn't a threat. It was a message. A prearranged code, delivered to another inmate who was being released the next day. A message to an old friend of my brother's on the outside, a white-hat hacker Leo trusted with his life. All he was waiting for was the final go-ahead." I looked at Kane. He nodded slowly, a look of profound resolution on his face. "The final argument was made about 5 minutes ago," he said calmly. As if on cue, the silver-haired man's phone began vibrating violently on the table, a furious, buzzing sound. Then Finch's phone joined in, then another. Thompson pulled out his own phone, his eyes widening in sheer disbelief. "What is it?" I asked, though I already knew. "It's everywhere," Thompson stammered, staring at his screen. "News alerts. Data dumps. The kill switch. It looks like it decrypted and released everything. Every communication ever secured by Janus. Memos, Black Ops budgets, emails, informant lists. My God, it's all public. Chaos. Pure, unadulterated chaos." The architect fumbled with his phone, his face a mask of horror as he saw his shadow empire dissolving into the light. Finch just sat there, ashen, his career, his life, turning to digital dust. On Thompson's signal, federal marshals, prearranged by a newly emboldened investigator, burst into the room. The architect didn't resist. He just slumped in his chair, a powerful man suddenly broken and small. They led Kane away. As he passed me, he paused, and his eyes met mine. He whispered, "For Leo." Then he was gone, a man who had sacrificed his freedom to see justice done. I stood there for a long time, watching them clean up the debris of the lives we had just shattered. I had won. My brother's name was cleared, in a way. Justice, in its own brutal, chaotic fashion, had been served. In the aftermath, there was no parade, no medal. The fallout from the Janus dump was so catastrophic, rocking governments and corporations worldwide, that its origins were officially buried. The government spun a story about foreign cyber warfare to contain the panic. My role, and Kane's, was erased from the record. I got a quiet, internal reprimand for overstepping procedural boundaries, a meaningless slap on the wrist from a system that was secretly grateful but publicly had to save face. They let me keep my job. In the end, I was too dangerous to fire. So I still walk the line in the city of concrete and steel. But it's different now. The black and white lines of right and wrong, of law and crime, have bled into a murky, indistinguishable gray. I avenged my brother, but to do it, I unleashed a weapon of mass informational destruction on the world. Justice was served, but it left deep, ugly scars. The silence in my house is louder now than the cacophony of the prison. I got my revenge. But as I walk the lonely corridors of the cell blocks at night, the echo of my footsteps mocking me, I often wonder if I really won. or if I just traded one prison for another. So, I have to ask you. Drop a comment below and tell me, was that justice, or did I go too far? There are no easy answers here. And make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because the secrets I dug up didn't stop with Project Janus. And what I have to tell you next, well, you're not going to want to miss it.